On February 29th, 1936, a man in Elizabethton, Tennessee announced he'd been getting about 5 hours a night of sleep for the past several weeks. Now, y'all might not think that's anything really special to talk about, but in this case, it actually was, and that's the story we're going to tell today. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
You've kind of piqued my curiosity, Steve. 5 hours of sleep each night for the past several weeks. Some people would say, hey, I get 5 hours of sleep. Sometimes I get less than that. Of course, I used to get about 5 hours of sleep, maybe less than that, but now I wear a CPAP. But, this is way before they had CPAPs or anything like that. But, this is an interesting story about almost like an awakened, so to speak, Rip Van Winkle, if you want to call him that.
Well, you could call him that, and why don't we just get into the story and tell folks what's happening? Okay. Well, what we're going to tell you is the story of a man named, get this, Tizrow Tazrow Izrow Hazrow Scarizrow Silas McGhee, or Tizrow for short. Now, just who is Mr. McGhee? Well, in 1936, he was living in Elizabethton, Tennessee, at the end of a bridge on Main Street in a shack lined with cardboard boxes amidst furniture made from wooden crates and lard buckets. But despite the poverty, Tizrow was a celebrity, having been written about in a Ripley's Believe It or Not. You see, McGhee had gone for more than 20 years, 2 decades, without sleeping, up until early 1936. But we'll get to that here in a moment, won't we, Rod?
We sure will, Steve, because Tizrow McGhee was born in eastern Kentucky, near Island Creek in Pike County, on Friday the 13th in 1877, and given what has to be the most unique name in the history of Appalachia, if not the entire country. At the age of 7, McGhee and his brother went out one night to find one of the family cows. It was at that time a tornado came roaring up and caused lightning to strike a tree near where the boys were standing. The tree shattered into kindling, and the boys suffered a shock that numbed their senses. When they were found the next morning by their cousin, Isaac Dye, the two were still in shock, so Dye led them to their sister, who took care of them. 2 weeks later, Tizrow regained his senses and realized he'd been in a coma all this time, with his brother likewise suffering for 4 days.
Well, a string of luck continued when at age 10, he was bitten by a rabid dog all the way through his right thumb, but never contracted rabies. In fact, he later reported that he got along all right and never felt any ill effects from the bite. As a young teen, he almost bled to death when he missed and slashed his right ankle while working with an axe on a watermill. He tried to rush home with his ankle bleeding badly, but passed out on the way. His father found him unconscious and started to whip him for being late, but instead decided to call the doctor. Good idea. The elder McGhee disagreed with the doctor's advice to bind the wound, instead putting a puffball, that's the fungus you'll find on a tree, a puffball on it to stop the bleeding, which it did. Now, in 1902, McGhee went to work for the C&O Railroad in Pike County, Kentucky. There he narrowly escaped death in an accidental explosion caused by an inexperienced man setting up a charge to blast rocks out of the way. He was unhurt, but another man was blown 75 feet, suffering breaks in all the major bones in his body when he hit the ground. Miraculously, that man survived.
Well, Tizrow got into a dispute with another man over land left to him at his father's death, with things escalating to a shootout. But he was unhurt in that encounter. In October of 1909, he lost one of his lungs while working on the C&O, Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, from having to work while suffering from a severe case of the flu. He was also injured in a sawmill accident in 1910. This guy sounds like he's just, an accident, waiting to happen, all these things. But none of these incidents compared to the one that caused him to stop sleeping. Because on January 25th, 1913, Tizrow McGhee was driving a coal car into the Coalwood, West Virginia mines. That sounds familiar. Homer Hickam, Coalwood, Know where you're talking about. Well, he accidentally moved his head at a point where the ceiling was low, and, well, he managed to catch himself between the trolley wire and the control box of his car. That is what caused his inability to sleep, and I'm sure it would a lot of other people, according to Tizrow, and resulted in him being awake, forget this, the next 23 years.
Well, in the fall of 1924, McGhee had another accident, believe it or not, when he was involved in the collision of two motor cars on the C&O. He ended up with a broken leg, broken ribs, and other injuries. He said, though, that the incident left him so physically numb that he didn't realize how bad he was hurt, and so he continued to work for 2 more days as the water boy for the other men. Once feeling returned to his body, though, he headed to the hospital for treatment and was then sent to another hospital in Baltimore to recover. And recover he did, because when he was released from care, Tizrow McGhee walked to Chicago, then moved to Elizabethton in 1925. By the way, Tizrow was married twice and had 6 sons and 7 daughters. I didn't mention that, Rod, but I thought I'd toss that out for you.
Not bad work for staying awake for 23 years, too, by the way, I should say. I'm kidding with that, but still. Anyway, in March of 1932, the news of Tizrow McGhee's inability to sleep had spread nationally, attracting the attention of the editors at Ripley's Believe It or Not, and his story was featured in a cartoon that month. He also made it into another cartoon, strange as it seems, by John Hicks in April of 1934. Now, we've got to say this. In all fairness, Tizrow conceded that while he didn't sleep for 23 years, there were times that he went into what I guess would be called a trance and be unconscious for hours at a time. One of these times happened in 1930 when he came home, put bread in the oven to bake, then zoned out and came around to find the bread had been burnt to a crisp and the stove cold as ice after the wood had burned out. Wow. On another occasion, McGhee went into a trance and was out for 3 days. He was found and taken to the doctor, where pins were stuck into him to see if he was still alive. That's a good way to find out, I guess. But when he didn't respond, it was presumed he had died and the undertaker was called. Well, just in time, though, Tizrow McGhee came back to his senses, or should we say came back to life, and avoided a coffin.
Well, Roddy even got into a lawsuit over his inability to sleep. In 1930, McGhee sued a local gravel company in Carter County, which fired him for sleeping on the job. He won his lawsuit in December that year and was awarded $1.25 in damages for lost wages.
Wow.
In 1936, Tizrow finally, after 2 decades, fell into an actual deep sleep. That lasted several hours, and after that he began to get about 5 hours of sleep every night. In October 1938, McGhee ran into some trouble with the law. He was charged with striking a woman and a child, arrested, and placed in the Carter County Jail. Instead of trying him, the court deported him, that's the court's words, to Cumberland, Kentucky via a one-way ticket and ordered to never, ever return to Elizabethton. And that, my friends, is where we kind of run out on information about Tizrow. He faded back out of the pages of history.
Maybe he went into a trance and nobody really knew what happened. I mean, this is wild, but, you know, we're saying that he didn't get sleep for 23 years, but subconsciously he had to be getting some sleep somewhere when he was going into those trances. Let's just say it that way. But, you know, the body is so weird, and the brain and everything else, you know, not sleeping for 23 years and then, you know, this thing of zoning out, so to speak, and then coming back. That's all kind of wild, though, isn't it, Steve?
Well, I tend to agree with you. I think he did sleep during those trances, and he may have exaggerated it, but I will say it does appear like he didn't sleep a whole lot during that time.
Right.
And that had to have affected him quite a bit. Probably one of the reasons why he had so many accidents, to be honest with you.
Now, they say the brain does weird things. So, this is another one of those examples. But, all this stuff started, putting his head up a little bit too high, I guess, and, striking that as he's going down underground in the coal car. A hit like that would probably do you in on certain cases, but he lived to tell about it. Lived through a lot of good luck, if you want to call it that. That's what he ended up surviving through.
Indeed he did. And folks, that's the story of a very unusual man. Tizrow Tazrow Izrow Hazrow Scarizrow Silas McGhee. One of the multitude of stories that make up the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for watching. Now, if you like our stories of Appalachia, please take the time to go down below, click that subscribe button, then ding the bell so you get notified every single time we put out a new video. And if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up too, okay? Again, thanks for watching. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.